The red lights flashed across every government building on every inhabited world in the galaxy. Emergency broadcasts interrupted regular programming on trillions of screens. Children stopped playing in alien playgrounds while their parents looked up at the sky with worry. This was the first time in galactic history that every single species had received the same message at the exact same moment. The Mindari were the first to panic. These tall, blue-skinned beings could read thoughts from across star systems, but even their powerful minds couldn't grasp what they were seeing in the deep space monitors. 3 entire solar systems had simply vanished. Not destroyed, not conquered, completely gone as if they had never existed at all. Where planets and stars once spun in their ancient dance, there was now only empty black space. Council leader Thera stood before the massive holographic display in the Galactic Assembly Hall. Her crystalline form sparkled with nervous energy as representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered in person or through quantum links. The plant-like verdans rustled their leaves in distress. The gas-based ethereal swirled in tight, worried spirals. Even the normally calm stone people of Granite Prime showed cracks of stress across their rocky faces. The threat calls itself the Void Swarm, Thyra announced, her voice echoing through translation devices in thousands of languages. Our oldest archives mention them in legends we thought were myths. They are not alive in any way we understand life. They consume reality itself, leaving nothing behind. The evidence was terrifying. Deep space probes had recorded the swarm's approach to the Helix system. The footage showed what looked like a massive cloud of pure darkness moving between the stars. When it touched the outer planets, they didn't explode or burn. They simply stopped existing. The cloud grew larger with each world it consumed, feeding on the very fabric of space and time. Dr. Venth, the galaxy's leading expert on cosmic threats, stepped forward. His tentacled form trembled as he spoke. Based on our calculations, the swarm will reach the core systems within 24 standard months. Every simulation we run shows the same result. Total extinction of all life in the galaxy. There is no known technology that can stop them. The assembly hall fell silent except for the soft humming of translation devices. Representatives who had spent centuries debating trade agreements and border disputes now faced something that made all their past problems seem like children's games. The Zephirites, known for their perfect mathematical minds, had run the numbers thousands of times. Every equation led to the same conclusion. They were all going to die. What about evacuation? Asked Ambassador Roth from the Crimson Worlds. Surely we can build ships to carry our populations to other galaxies. Dr. Venth's tentacles drooped. The nearest galaxy is too far away. Even with our fastest ships, the journey would take millions of years. The swarm moves faster than our best vessels. There is nowhere to run. Desperate suggestions filled the air. The Mindari proposed using their telepathic abilities to somehow communicate with the swarm. The Verdans suggested growing massive plants that might absorb the dark energy. The stone people offered to sacrifice their worlds to slow the swarm's advance. None of the ideas had any real chance of success, but panic made beings cling to impossible hopes. As the debate grew more frantic, a small chime sounded from the communication console. A junior technician, barely old enough to work in the assembly hall, raised one of his forearms nervously. Council Leader Thera, there's an incoming transmission from the Outer Rim territories. It's from the human colonial fleet. A wave of confused murmurs swept through the hall. Humans were newcomers to galactic society, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 300 years ago. Most council members knew little about them except that they came from a small, unremarkable world called Earth and had a reputation for surviving things that should have killed them. Put them through, Thyra decided. She had heard strange stories about humans, how they had somehow survived multiple extinction events on their own world, how they refused to give up even when facing impossible odds. Right now, the galaxy needed any help it could get. The holographic display shifted to show a middle-aged human woman sitting in what appeared to be a simple metal chair. She had short brown hair and wore a plain blue uniform. Behind her, other humans could be seen moving around what looked like a very basic spacecraft bridge. Nothing about the scene suggested advanced technology or cosmic wisdom. "This is Admiral Beth Rodriguez of the Human Colonial Fleet," the woman said in a calm, steady voice. "We received your emergency broadcast. Sounds like you folks are having a rough day." The casual tone shocked the assembled representatives. Here was a being from a primitive world, speaking about galactic extinction as if it were a minor inconvenience. Several council members began to object, but Thera held up a hand for silence. "Admiral Rodriguez," Thera said carefully, "we appreciate your concern. But this threat is beyond anything your species has encountered. The Void Swarm has already consumed 3 star systems. Our greatest minds see no solution," Beth nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, we saw the footage. Pretty nasty stuff. We've dealt with existential threats before, though. Climate change, nuclear weapons, asteroid impacts, that kind of thing. Usually there's a way through if you're willing to get creative." The confidence in her voice was both inspiring and infuriating to the panicked council members. How could this human remain so calm while discussing the end of everything? The Mindari representative tried to read her thoughts but found only determination, mixed with what seemed to be professional interest in a challenging problem. "We would welcome any assistance," Thyra said finally, "though I must warn you, our best scientists estimate only a 2% chance of finding any solution." Beth smiled, and something in that expression made several council members feel better despite themselves. "Admiral, we've beaten worse odds than that. My people are already running some preliminary analysis. Give us 48 hours and access to your data archives. We'll see what we can do." As the transmission ended, the assembly hall buzzed with mixed reactions. Some representatives were outraged that primitive humans thought they could solve problems that stumped advanced civilizations. Others clung to hope that fresh perspectives might see something everyone else had missed. Deep in her crystalline heart, Council Leader Thyra felt something she hadn't experienced since the first reports of the Void Swarm arrived. The smallest spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy might survive after all. Admiral Beth Rodriguez finished reading the Galactic Threat Assessment Report while eating a simple sandwich in her quarters. The data was sobering. 3 star systems completely erased from existence, an unstoppable force moving toward the galaxy's heart, and the greatest minds in known space declaring the situation hopeless. She chewed thoughtfully, then reached for her communication device. "All senior staff to conference room B in 20 minutes, she announced to the ship. "And somebody bring the good coffee. We've got work to do." The crew of the research vessel Persistence had been conducting routine surveys of unexplored star systems when the emergency broadcast reached them. Unlike the panic spreading through the galactic core worlds, the human response was notably different. Chief Engineer Paul Kim was already sketching engine modifications on his tablet. Dr. Lisa Wong had pulled up every piece of data about the Void Swarm she could access. Security Chief Anna Davis was reviewing the ship's defensive capabilities with the calm efficiency of someone planning a training exercise. When the senior staff gathered in the conference room, Beth spread the holographic data across the table. The images showed the dark cloud consuming entire worlds, leaving nothing but void behind. The assembled humans studied the footage with professional interest rather than terror. "So," Paul said, pointing at the swarm's movement patterns, "this thing eats reality. That's new." "Not entirely," Dr. Wong corrected, pulling up comparative data. "We've theorized about similar phenomena. Dark matter interactions, quantum field collapses. The scale is unprecedented, but the basic physics might be understandable." Beth nodded. "The Galactic Council is in full panic mode. They're convinced this is impossible to stop. What do we think?" The room fell quiet as the humans considered the problem. This was how they always worked. Break down the impossible into manageable pieces, look for patterns and weaknesses, refuse to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. "The swarm doesn't destroy matter," Lisa observed, reviewing the energy readings. "It seems to disconnect matter from local spacetime. The atoms are still there, just not connected to our reality anymore." Paul studied the technical specifications. "If that's true, then it's not actually consuming energy. It's redirecting it somehow. That means it has to follow some kind of physical laws, even if we don't understand them yet." Anna, ever practical, asked the important question, "Can we fight it?" "Everything fights differently," Beth replied. "Even things that seem unstoppable usually have some kind of weakness or pattern we can exploit. The real question is whether we can figure it out in time." Over the next 48 hours, the human ship became a hub of intense activity. The crew worked in rotating shifts, analyzing every piece of available data about the Void Swarm. They contacted human colonies throughout the Outer Rim, gathering additional observations and resources. Most importantly, they approached the problem from directions that hadn't occurred to other species. While the galactic community focused on finding a perfect technological solution, some weapon or shield that could stop the swarm completely. The humans took a different approach. They assumed they would have to fight with imperfect tools and incomplete information. This meant looking for any advantage, no matter how small or temporary. Dr. Wong made the first breakthrough while reviewing deep space communication logs. "Look at this," she said, calling Beth to her workstation. "The swarm's movement isn't completely random. It avoids certain regions of space. The pattern was subtle, areas where the swarm changed direction slightly or moved more slowly. At first it seemed random, but Lisa had noticed something the galactic analysts missed. Every region the swarm avoided had one thing in common: high levels of electromagnetic interference from human communication relays and navigation beacons. Our technology is different, Paul realized, studying the data. Most galactic civilizations use quantum field manipulation and clean energy systems. Human tech is still based on electromagnetic radiation and controlled energy release. It's primitive by their standards, but it creates interference patterns that their clean systems don't generate. The implications were startling. Humanity's backward technology might be the key to understanding the swarm's weakness. While other species had evolved beyond electromagnetic radiation, seeing it as crude and inefficient, humans still used it for everything from music players to starship engines. Beth assembled her findings and requested another meeting with the Galactic Council. When her transmission reached the assembly hall, the scene was very different from 48 hours earlier. The panic had deepened. Several species had begun mass evacuations of their core worlds. Others were building desperate fortifications that everyone knew would be useless. "Admiral Rodriguez," Council Leader Thyra said when the human appeared on screen. "Do you have anything to report?" "We think we found something," Beth replied. "The swarm has a weakness. It's affected by electromagnetic interference, the kind our technology produces naturally." The reaction was immediate and dismissive. Dr. Venth's tentacles writhed in frustration. "Admiral, we've tested every known form of energy weapon against simulated swarm models. Nothing has any effect. With respect, Doctor, you've been testing advanced energy weapons that operate on quantum principles. We're talking about old-fashioned electromagnetic radiation, radio waves, microwave emissions, the kind of interference that comes from primitive technology." The assembly hall buzzed with confused conversation. Many species had abandoned electromagnetic technology millennia ago, considering it a relic of less advanced civilizations. The idea that primitive human devices might affect a cosmic threat that advanced weapons couldn't touch seemed impossible. The Mindari representative, who had been monitoring human thoughts throughout the conversation, suddenly spoke up. Their minds show no deception. "They genuinely believe this approach might work," Beth continued. "We need to test this theory on a larger scale. If we're right, we can modify our ships to generate massive electromagnetic pulses. We'll need cooperation from other species to create a coordinated defense grid." The debate that followed was intense. Many council members argued that trusting primitive human technology with the galaxy's survival was insane. Others pointed out that their own advanced solutions had produced nothing but proof that defeat was certain. Finally, Ambassador Crean from the outer colonies spoke up. "What do we have to lose? Our best projections show total extinction in 20 months. If the humans are wrong, we're no worse off than we are now. If they're right," Thyra said slowly, "then the galaxy's salvation comes from the species we considered the least advanced." The vote was close, but it passed. The Galactic Council would provide the humans with resources and cooperation to test their electromagnetic interference theory. Deep space monitoring stations would be modified to generate powerful EM fields. Ships would be retrofitted with human-designed broadcasting equipment. As the meeting ended, Beth felt the weight of the entire galaxy's hopes settling on her shoulders. Every thinking being in known space was counting on humanity to find a solution that had escaped far more advanced civilizations. She closed the communication link and turned to her crew. "All right, people. We've got 18 months to save the galaxy using radio waves and electromagnetic interference. Anyone have any better ideas?" Paul grinned. "Actually, Admiral, I've been thinking about our music collection. If we're going to broadcast electromagnetic signals across multiple star systems, we might as well make them interesting." For the first time in days, Beth smiled. Leave it to humans to suggest saving the galaxy with rock music. Somehow that felt exactly right. The Deep Space Research Station Omega-7 had been quiet for decades, monitoring cosmic background radiation in a remote corner of the galaxy. Now it buzzed with activity as engineers from a dozen species worked alongside humans to install the most unusual defensive system in galactic history. Instead of energy shields or quantum disruptors, they were building massive electromagnetic broadcast arrays designed to fill space with what most civilizations considered electronic noise. Dr. Lisa Wong floated in zero gravity outside the station, directing the installation of a human-designed transmitter array. The device looked primitive compared to the sleek technology of other species: exposed cables, crude metal housings, and components that actually generated heat and electromagnetic radiation as byproducts rather than eliminating them. "The Zephyrites think we're insane," her assistant, Engineer Robert Lee, commented through the comm system. "They keep running efficiency calculations and pointing out how much energy we're wasting." Lisa smiled inside her helmet. "Waste is the point. Advanced civilizations eliminated electromagnetic interference because it's messy and inefficient, but mess might be exactly what we need." 3 months had passed since the Galactic Council approved the human plan. The time had been spent in frantic preparation as human engineers worked with alien scientists to understand and replicate the electromagnetic effects that seemed to disturb the Void Swarm's movement patterns. The work was complicated by fundamental differences in how various species approach technology. Most galactic civilizations had evolved beyond the crude electromagnetic spectrum millions of years ago. Their technology operated through quantum field manipulation, controlled gravity waves, and clean energy systems that produced no waste radiation. Human technology, by comparison, was incredibly primitive, but it was also incredibly noisy in ways that more advanced systems weren't. The breakthrough had come when the research team realized that the Void Swarm operated by connecting to and manipulating quantum fields in local space-time. The electromagnetic interference generated by human technology disrupted these connections, like static interfering with a radio signal. The effect was small but measurable, enough to confuse the swarm's navigation and disrupt its feeding process. Beth Rodriguez stood in the command center of the hastily constructed defense grid, watching as status reports flowed in from across the galaxy. Hundreds of stations like Omega-7 were being modified with human technology. Ships from dozens of species were being retrofitted with electromagnetic broadcasting equipment. The logistics were staggering, but somehow the diverse galactic community was making it work. "Admiral," called Communications Officer Dan Parker from his console, "we're getting reports from the outer monitoring stations. The swarm has consumed the Kepler Beta system. It's 12 months out from the first core worlds." The room fell silent. Everyone knew this day would come, but actually hearing that another star system had been erased from existence sent chills through even the most experienced officers. Somewhere out there, an ancient horror was moving steadily toward the heart of galactic civilization, and all that stood between it and total extinction was an untested theory and a collection of primitive radio transmitters. Paul Kim approached Beth with a tablet full of technical specifications. "We've finished the final modifications to the primary broadcast array. The system can now generate electromagnetic interference patterns across 17 different frequency bands simultaneously. We're calling it the Thunder Wall." Beth reviewed the data. The Thunder Wall was humanity's answer to the swarm's reality-consuming abilities. Instead of trying to stop the swarm directly, the system would fill a massive region of space with overlapping electromagnetic fields, creating a zone of confusion that might slow or redirect the creature's advance. "What's our coverage area?" Beth asked. "If we coordinate all the modified stations and ships, we can create an interference field covering roughly 1/10 of the galaxy," Paul replied. "It won't stop the swarm completely, but it should disrupt its navigation enough to buy us time." Dr. Wong joined them, having finished her work on the transmitter array. "I've been thinking about the swarm's behavior patterns. It doesn't just consume matter randomly. It follows what looks like optimal feeding routes, always taking the path that gives it the most energy with the least effort." "So it's intelligent?" Beth asked. "Not intelligent exactly, but it follows predictable patterns. If we can disrupt those patterns, force it to take longer, less efficient routes, we might be able to exhaust whatever energy reserves it's operating on." The strategy was uniquely human. Instead of trying to find a perfect solution that would eliminate the threat completely, they were planning to annoy it to death. Make the swarm's job harder, less efficient, more confusing until it gave up and went away. It was the kind of approach that made sense to a species that had survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and nuclear weapons through stubborn persistence rather than superior technology. As the months passed, the defense grid took shape. Human engineers worked around the clock with alien scientists, bridging the gap between primitive electromagnetic technology and advanced galactic engineering. The cultural exchange was fascinating. Species that had dismissed human technology as crude began to appreciate its unique properties, while humans learned to integrate their systems with quantum field generators and gravity wave manipulators. The Mindari provided telepathic coordination between distant stations. The Verdans grew organic computing networks that could process the massive data flows required to synchronize the electromagnetic broadcasts. The Stone People of Granite Prime contributed their patient, methodical approach to construction projects that required perfect precision across vast distances. 6 months before the projected arrival of the Void Swarm at the first core worlds, the Thunderwall came online for its first full-scale test. Across a region of space larger than most solar systems, hundreds of modified stations and ships began broadcasting coordinated electromagnetic interference patterns. The energy signature was visible from light years away, a crackling wall of electronic noise that painted space with frequencies that hadn't been seen in most sectors for millions of years. The test results were promising but inconclusive. Deep space probes detected the swarm's movement patterns, shifting slightly when it encountered the outer edges of the interference field. The creature didn't stop or turn back, but its advance slowed and its path became less direct. It was working, but would it be enough? Beth stood on the observation deck of Omega-7, looking out at the modified transmitter arrays that now covered the station like a metallic forest. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying. Humanity's primitive technology merged with the galaxy's most advanced engineering, all in service of a desperate plan to confuse a cosmic horror into leaving them alone. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Paul asked, joining her at the viewing port. "I keep thinking about what happens if this doesn't work," Beth replied. "The entire galaxy is counting on us, and our plan basically amounts to annoying the swarm with radio static until it goes away." Paul chuckled. "When you put it like that, it does sound pretty crazy. But crazy is what we do best. Besides, every other plan had a 0% chance of success. At least we're giving everyone hope." As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Wong's voice came over the intercom. "Admiral Rodriguez to the command center immediately. We're receiving emergency transmissions from the Helix monitoring station." Beth and Paul hurried to the command center, where they found the communication staff gathered around the main display. The transmission from Helix Station was broken and filled with static, but the message was clear enough. The Void Swarm had reached the outer edge of the Thunder Wall. The real test was about to begin. The war room aboard the flagship Endurance had become the nerve center for the most desperate battle in galactic history. Representatives from every major species stood around holographic displays showing the Void Swarm's approach, their faces reflecting a mixture of hope and terror. The Thunderwall was active, filling space with electromagnetic interference, but nobody knew if it would be enough. Captain Mike Chen studied the tactical displays with the calm focus of someone who had spent his career dealing with impossible situations. Unlike the alien representatives who seemed frozen by the magnitude of the threat, Chen was already thinking 3 moves ahead, planning contingencies for contingencies. "The swarm hit the outer perimeter 6 hours ago," he reported to the assembled leaders. "Initial reports show it's being affected by the interference, but it's also adapting faster than we anticipated." The holographic display showed the swarm's movement through the Thunder Wall. Instead of the random confusion they had hoped for, the creature was learning to navigate around the strongest interference zones. Its advance had slowed, but it was still moving steadily toward the core worlds. Ambassador Thyra's crystalline form sparkled with nervous energy. "How long do we have?" "At current rate of approach, 18 days until it reaches the first inhabited system," Chen replied. "But that assumes it doesn't figure out how to move through the interference more efficiently." Dr. Venth's tentacles writhed in despair. "This confirms our worst projections. The swarm can adapt to any defense we create. We should begin immediate evacuation of the core worlds." "No," Beth Rodriguez said firmly, entering the war room with her senior staff. "We're not giving up yet. The interference is working. We just need to make it work better." The alien representatives turned to stare at the human admiral. After months of preparation, the Thunderwall, their best hope for survival, was proving insufficient, yet the humans still refused to accept defeat. The Mindari representative tried to read their thoughts and found something that defied understanding. Instead of despair, the human minds were filled with determination and what could only be described as professional excitement. "Admiral," Thyra said carefully, "our projections show the swarm will adapt completely to the electromagnetic interference within 72 hours. After that, nothing will slow its advance," Beth nodded. "Then we don't give it 72 hours to adapt. We change the game before it can figure out the rules." She activated her portable display, showing new tactical plans that made several alien representatives step backward in alarm. Instead of maintaining a static defense, the humans proposed something that looked like organized chaos. Ships moving in apparently random patterns, broadcasting conflicting signals, creating interference zones that shifted and changed faster than any creature could adapt to them. "This is madness," Dr. Venth protested. "You're suggesting we abandon coordinated defense in favor of random actions. The probability calculations are impossible to run." "Exactly," Chief Engineer Paul Kim said with a grin. "If we can't predict what we're going to do, neither can the swarm. We're going to improvise." The plan that emerged from the next 6 hours of frantic discussion was unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of trying to create a perfect defense, the humans proposed embracing imperfection. Ships would move in response to real-time observations rather than following predetermined patterns. Broadcasting frequencies would change randomly. The entire defense grid would operate like a massive jazz performance, coordinated but unpredictable. Most of the alien species found the concept terrifying. Their civilizations had spent millions of years perfecting order, efficiency, and predictable outcomes. The idea of deliberately introducing chaos into their most important battle went against every instinct they had developed, but as the hours passed and the swarm continued to adapt to their carefully planned defenses, even the most skeptical representatives began to see the logic in the human approach. Order could be predicted and countered. Chaos, by definition, could not. The first test of the new strategy came when the swarm reached the middle layers of the Thunderwall. Captain Chen led a squadron of modified ships in what appeared to be a completely random attack run. Instead of following textbook tactics, they improvised responses based on moment-to-moment observations of the swarm's behavior. When the swarm extended tendrils toward Chen's ship, he responded by broadcasting a combination of human rock music and Verdanic growth harmonics through his electromagnetic arrays. The weird mixture of frequencies created interference patterns that nobody had tested, but which seemed to confuse the dark tendrils long enough for the ship to escape. Dr. Wong, monitoring from the command center, watched the energy readings with fascination. "The swarm is trying to analyze and counter each signal pattern, but we're changing them faster than it can adapt. It's like trying to learn a language where the rules change every sentence." The success was temporary but encouraging. The swarm's advance slowed significantly as it struggled to process the constantly changing electromagnetic environment. However, the strain on the human forces was enormous. Improvising effective responses required split-second decisions and perfect coordination between ships that were deliberately not following any coordinated plan. As the battle continued, something unexpected began to happen. The alien species, initially horrified by the chaotic human tactics, started to contribute their own forms of controlled chaos. The Mindari began broadcasting random telepathic noise that interfered with the swarm's ability to predict their next moves. The Verdans started growing plants that generated unpredictable bioelectric fields. Even the logical Zephyrite began introducing deliberate calculation errors into their precisely ordered systems. The galaxy's greatest strength, its diversity, became a weapon that the swarm couldn't counter. Every species contributed a different kind of chaos, creating a symphony of disorder that kept the creature constantly off balance. But the swarm was learning. With each passing hour, it adapted more quickly to new interference patterns. What had once taken it hours to counter now took minutes. The improvised defense was buying time, but time was running out. Paul Kim, working frantically in the engineering section, came up with the most desperate idea yet. What if we stop trying to confuse it from the outside? What if we get inside its structure and create interference from within? The plan was suicidal. It involved flying ships directly into the swarm's dark mass and detonating specially modified electromagnetic pulse generators from inside the creature's reality-disrupting field. No one knew if the ships would survive long enough to trigger the devices, or if the electromagnetic pulses would even work at such close range. Beth studied the proposal with the same calm attention she gave to routine supply reports. Around her, alien representatives were calculating probability curves that showed almost certain death for any crew that attempted the mission. The humans, meanwhile, were already volunteering. "How many ships do we need?" Beth asked. "Minimum of 12 for effective coverage," Paul replied. "But given the risks, we should probably send 20. "We'll send 30, Beth decided. "When we're improvising, it's better to have too many variables than too few." The final assault on the Void Swarm would be a masterpiece of controlled chaos. 30 ships flying into certain death, carrying weapons that might or might not work, following a plan that was being written in real time. It was exactly the kind of impossible mission that humans had been training for their entire history. As the volunteer crews prepared for launch, Captain Chen addressed them over the communication system. "Remember, we're not trying to be heroes here. We're trying to be annoying. Get in, 'cause as much electromagnetic chaos as possible, and get out if you can. If you can't get out, make sure your chaos counts." The ships launched into the dark heart of the Void Swarm, carrying with them the galaxy's last hope and humanity's unwavering belief that any problem could be solved if you were willing to break enough rules in the process. Space around the Void Swarm erupted in controlled chaos as 30 human ships dove into the creature's dark mass. The electromagnetic interference from their modified engines created lightning-like displays across the swarm's surface, while specially designed pulse generators prepared to detonate in the heart of the reality-consuming entity. From the command center aboard the Endurance, Beth Rodriguez watched her crews disappear into what looked like a storm made of living darkness. The first ships to enter the swarm immediately lost communication with the outside fleet. Their signals became garbled streams of static mixed with readings that made no sense, temperatures that violated physics, gravitational fields that pointed in impossible directions, and electromagnetic signatures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. "Hull integrity at 60% and falling," came the crackling voice of Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the ship Defiance. "The swarm is trying to disconnect us from local spacetime, but the pulse generators are creating interference with the process. It's like being inside a tornado made of broken mathematics." Captain Chen, leading the assault from his ship Stubborn Hope, found himself fighting a battle unlike anything in military history. Traditional tactics meant nothing when the enemy could make the laws of physics optional. Instead, he relied on the most human approach possible. He got creative and refused to give up. "All ships, ignore your instrument readings," Chen broadcast to his squadron. "Trust your instincts and keep moving. Every second we stay inside this thing, we're disrupting its feeding process." The plan was working, but not in the way anyone had expected. The electromagnetic pulse generators weren't destroying the swarm. They were confusing it so badly that it began attacking itself. Different parts of the creature tried to process contradictory information about the reality around them, creating feedback loops that disrupted its unified consciousness. Dr. Wong, monitoring from the Endurance, watched the energy readings with growing excitement. "The swarm operates as a collective intelligence, but our interference is breaking the connections between different sections. It's becoming multiple smaller entities instead of one unified creature. This was the breakthrough they needed, but it came with a terrible cost." Ship after ship disappeared into the swarm's mass, their crews sacrificing themselves to maintain the electromagnetic chaos that was tearing the creature apart. The volunteers knew they probably wouldn't survive, but they kept fighting anyway because that's what humans did when faced with impossible odds. Lieutenant Sarah Kim's ship was one of the last to maintain contact with the outside fleet. Her voice, distorted by the reality-warping effects around her, came through the communication system with grim determination. "Pulse generator charging to maximum. I'm going to try something that's either brilliant or incredibly stupid." "What's your plan, Lieutenant?" Beth asked. "I'm going to ram this thing's brain," Sarah replied. "The swarm has a central coordination node about 2 kilometers from my current position. If I can get the pulse generator there and detonate it manually, it might disrupt the creature's ability to reorganize itself." The plan was beyond dangerous. It was suicide. But it was also exactly the kind of stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had carried humanity through every crisis in their history. When faced with extinction, humans didn't calculate probabilities or look for perfect solutions. They found something worth fighting for and refused to stop fighting until they won or died trying. "Permission granted, Lieutenant," Beth said quietly. "Make it count." The final moments of Sarah Kim's mission were witnessed by sensors that barely functioned in the reality-distorted environment around the swarm. Her ship, damaged beyond any hope of survival, somehow managed to reach the creature's coordination center and detonate the most powerful electromagnetic pulse ever created by human technology. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The unified consciousness that had held the void swarm together for millions of years shattered like glass. Instead of one massive entity consuming reality, there were now hundreds of smaller creatures that immediately began fighting each other for resources and territory. But the victory was incomplete. The fragmented swarm was still dangerous, and without constant electromagnetic interference, the pieces might eventually reunite into something even more powerful than before. The battle was far from over. This was when humanity's greatest strength revealed itself. Not their technology or their tactics, but their absolute refusal to accept defeat even when victory seemed impossible. While other species began celebrating the apparent success, the humans doubled down on their efforts. "All remaining ships, prepare for extended engagement," Beth announced to the fleet. "We're not done until that thing is either dead or running away so fast it never comes back." Captain Chen, miraculously still alive in his heavily damaged ship, led the next phase of the assault. Instead of trying to escape the swarm's reality-warping effects, he decided to weaponize them. "If this thing can disconnect matter from space-time, maybe we can use that against it." The plan that emerged was typically human in its combination of brilliant insight and reckless disregard for safety. The remaining ships would use their electromagnetic pulse generators not to destroy the swarm fragments, but to trap them in recursive loops where they would consume their own reality-warping fields. Dr. Wong made the crucial discovery while analyzing the battle data. Human brainwaves generate specific electromagnetic frequencies that seem particularly effective at disrupting the swarm's consciousness. If we could amplify those frequencies, the final battle became something that no military strategist in galactic history could have predicted. Human crews throughout the fleet began focusing their thoughts on aggressive, determined emotions while their ships amplified and broadcast their brainwave patterns. It was psychological warfare taken to a cosmic level, literally thinking aggressively at an enemy that fed on ordered reality. The remaining fragments of the void swarm, already confused and weakened by the electromagnetic chaos, found themselves unable to process the contradictory signals generated by determined human minds. The creatures had evolved to consume ordered reality, but human consciousness was messy, chaotic, and stubbornly illogical in ways that broke their fundamental understanding of how the universe should work. One by one, the swarm fragments began to retreat, fleeing back toward the empty void between galaxies. They had encountered something they couldn't understand, couldn't predict, and couldn't consume. The sheer bloody-minded stubbornness of a species that refused to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. As the last of the swarm disappeared into deep space, the assembled galactic fleet found itself surrounded by the strangest victory celebration in history. Ships from dozens of species, many heavily damaged but still functional, floated in space that had been cleared of an impossible threat through methods that violated every principle of logical military strategy. Beth Rodriguez, exhausted but victorious, addressed the fleet from the bridge of the Endurance. "All ships, this is Admiral Rodriguez. The immediate threat has been neutralized. The void swarm is in retreat. Stand down from combat alert and prepare for damage assessment." The response that came back from hundreds of ships in dozens of languages was the same: cheering, celebration, and absolute bewilderment at what they had just witnessed. The galaxy had been saved not by superior technology or perfect strategy, but by a species that approached cosmic threats the same way they approached broken machinery, with determination, creativity, and a stubborn refusal to admit that anything was truly impossible to fix. 3 weeks after the void swarm's retreat, the Galactic Assembly Hall buzzed with activity as representatives from every major civilization gathered to discuss the aftermath of humanity's impossible victory. The hall had been redesigned to accommodate new security measures. advanced warning systems, and what the Mindari insisted on, calling chaos integration protocols, formal, procedures for incorporating unpredictable human tactics into galactic defense planning. Admiral Beth Rodriguez sat at a simple metal table, filling out paperwork with the same methodical attention she gave to routine supply requisitions. Around her, alien diplomats delivered passionate speeches about the new age of cooperation between species, the lessons learned from the crisis, and the need to prepare for future threats. Beth nodded politely at the appropriate moments while completing Form 2847B, Post-Combat Equipment Damage Assessment. The cultural impact of humanity's victory was profound and deeply unsettling to most galactic civilizations. Species that had spent millions of years perfecting order and logic now found themselves studying chaos theory and improvisation techniques. The Zephyrites had established a department of calculated randomness. The Mindari were learning to appreciate thoughts that didn't follow logical patterns. Even the stone people of Granite Prime were experimenting with deliberate imperfection in their construction projects. Council leader Thyra approached Beth's table with the graceful movements of someone who had spent weeks learning to appear calm while feeling completely confused. Admiral Rodriguez, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to express our profound gratitude for humanity's role in saving our civilization. Beth looked up from her paperwork and smiled. Just doing our job, Council Leader. Though I have to say, your logistics support made all the difference. We couldn't have coordinated the electromagnetic grid without the Verdanic biocomputing networks. The casual response was typical of human behavior that continued to baffle the galactic community. 3 weeks after preventing total extinction, the humans were treating their victory as if it had been a moderately challenging engineering project rather than the most desperate battle in galactic history. Dr. Venth, who had spent the week since the battle studying human tactical methods, approached with a collection of data tablets. Admiral, I've been analyzing your species' approach to crisis management. The mathematical models are disturbing. You consistently choose strategies with low probability of success over safer alternatives with higher survival rates. That's because we define success differently, Beth replied, signing another damage report. You calculate the probability of achieving perfect outcomes. We calculate the probability of achieving any positive outcome at all. When you're facing impossible odds, a 1% chance of total victory is better than a 90% chance of partial survival. The philosophical implications of this difference were keeping alien scholars busy across the galaxy. Human civilization operated on principles that seemed to violate basic logic. They planned for failure while expecting success. They embraced dangerous uncertainty over safe predictability, and they treated catastrophic threats as interesting problems to be solved rather than disasters to be endured. Captain Mike Chen joined the conversation, carrying a tablet displaying the latest threat assessment reports. Admiral, we're getting some interesting readings from the deep space monitoring stations. There's unusual activity in the Andromeda region that might indicate another cosmic-level threat. Beth reviewed the data with professional interest. The readings showed energy patterns that didn't match any known phenomenon. Massive gravitational disturbances, quantum field fluctuations, and what appeared to be controlled stellar manipulation, on a scale that dwarfed even the Void Swarm's capabilities. How long before it reaches our galaxy? Beth asked. Based on current trajectory and speed, approximately 18 months, Chen replied. But the entity appears to be intelligent and might change course once it detects our defensive preparations. Council leader Thyra, who had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm, stepped forward. Admiral, are you suggesting that another existential threat is approaching? Something potentially more dangerous than the Void Swarm? Beth nodded calmly. Looks that way. We should probably start preparing countermeasures within the next few months. The casual tone with which the humans discussed facing another galaxy-ending threat sent waves of shock through the assembled representatives. Most species were still recovering from the trauma of the Void Swarm encounter. The idea of immediately preparing for an even greater danger seemed impossible to contemplate. Dr. Wong approached from the technical station, where she had been reviewing the sensor data. The energy signatures suggest this entity manipulates matter on a quantum level rather than disconnecting it from reality. We'll need a completely different approach, probably something involving quantum field harmonics rather than electromagnetic interference. Any initial ideas? Beth asked. Well, human music creates interesting quantum resonance patterns when properly amplified. I'm thinking we could modify our concert broadcasting arrays to generate quantum static instead of electromagnetic noise. The Mindari representative, who had been monitoring the human conversation telepathically, spoke up with visible bewilderment. You're discussing the potential end of galactic civilization as if it were a routine maintenance problem. Beth looked up from her paperwork with mild surprise. Isn't it? I mean, we've got 18 months to figure out how to deal with a quantum manipulating cosmic entity. That's plenty of time to run some tests, modify our existing systems, and maybe develop a few new approaches. We solved the void swarm problem in less time than that. The fundamental difference in perspective was becoming clear to the alien observers. For most galactic species, cosmic threats represented existential crises that challenged their entire understanding of reality and possibility. For humans, they represented engineering problems that required creative solutions and stubborn persistence. As the assembly session continued, reports flowed in from across the galaxy about the aftermath of the Void Swarm battle. Human engineering teams were helping other species incorporate electromagnetic chaos generators into their defense systems. Human tactical advisors were teaching alien military academies about improvisation and adaptive strategy. Human philosophers were sharing their insights about embracing uncertainty and finding opportunity in crisis. The galaxy was changing in fundamental ways, adopting human approaches to problem-solving and crisis management. But perhaps the most significant change was psychological, the growing understanding that any threat, no matter how impossible it seemed, could be defeated if you refused to accept defeat and were willing to try approaches that seemed completely insane. Beth finished her paperwork and stood up from the table. Well, Council Leader, if there's nothing else, I should get back to my ship. We need to start running preliminary tests on quantum field harmonics, and I want to review our music collection to see which pieces generate the most interesting resonance patterns. As she prepared to leave, Beth paused and turned back to the assembled representatives. Oh, and Council Leader, you might want to start thinking about how to coordinate another galaxy-wide defense grid. If this new threat is as big as it looks, we're going to need everyone working together again. With that, Beth Rodriguez walked out of the assembly hall, leaving behind a room full of alien diplomats who were slowly coming to terms with the fact that their saviors considered surviving the impossible to be just another day at the office. 3 hours later, Beth sat in her quarters aboard the Endurance, reviewing technical specifications for quantum field generators while drinking coffee and listening to classical music. On her desk, next to reports about the approaching cosmic threat, sat a simple note she had written to herself. Wednesday's looking interesting. Outside her window, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that somewhere in the darkness, another impossible threat was moving toward the galaxy. But for the first time in galactic history, those same stars were protected by a species that had never learned to accept that anything was truly impossible to fix. The galaxy was in peril again. To humans, it was just another Monday.